Here we are, ready to discuss practical cases of the arguments I was presenting you in the previous chapter. So in the previous chapter, I was telling you my point of view about emotions in bioethics and why we should promote a rigorous studies of emotions in bioethics and what we would gain from that. Here I'm presenting you with a few cases. In this chapter, I will discuss the cases that make sense for a serious consideration of emotions in bioethics. In the next chapter, I would present cases to prove why bioethics can be useful for human emotional regulation. So I'm discussing the problem from a two-directional perspective, as I showed you in the slide in the previous chapter. So now, why it's important to understand and know emotions and be aware of our emotions in bioethics. Let's consider the case of depressed doctors. I mean, the number is staggering. Depression in medical professions is on the rise. Reasonably, because per human beings, they are more exposed to pain, suffering, vulnerability, and yet they are those who can resort to psychotherapeutic help the least. Having a mental health diagnosis on their record is perceived as a sure way to lose their license. There are plenty of studies in this instance. The Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act was a great idea to reinforce the importance of our right to be mentally ill and to take care of ourselves whenever that problem would arise. This legislation was proposed with the intent of seeing mental problems at the same level as physical problems. Yet the result was exactly the opposite. It increased the stigma. Saying to your boss that you're going through burnout, depression, anxiety would not, as a matter of fact, be considered as an actual issue, or if it's considered as an actual issue, it's a sufficient reason to not trust your work and to stigmatize your presence in the office and to leave you aside. It's a sufficient reason to lose trust, henceforth to lose your job. So here I cited just a few literature on the topic, but it's really an immense field of study that which should take seriously, since physicians have access to and the knowledge of the means to end their life. They have a suicide completion rate estimated as twice higher than the rest of the general population, according to a 2018 report published in Medscape. And this suicide rate is even stronger when we consider medical school. So students and physicians in training, new to their career and in a highly competitive environment, are even less likely to admit that they have a problem. Of course, you are training, you are new to all this, you might not get even the license if you say something, so it's better to stay quiet and to try to cope with that. But this increases the chances of suicide. So, I mean, my question is really simple. How can depressed doctors take care of our well-being if we don't give ourselves the chance? So if we don't give these doctors a chance to take their emotions seriously, if we don't give ourselves a chance to take our emotions seriously, how can shut down doctors take care of their clients, their patients in a balanced way, if they don't even have the freedom to take care of themselves? if we are creating a society in which emotions are considered mostly to be repressed, both when we are patients and when we are doctors. It's irrational. This is irrational. It's not irrational to consider that today I feel low, I feel in a bad mood. It's irrational to say that I shouldn't even mention that today I feel low, I feel in a bad mood, and I should not even consider that this low mood can influence my way of, I don't know, I'm a teacher grading papers, I'm a philosophical counselor receiving clients, I'm a doctor receiving patients. This would be rational, not the mood itself. Nevertheless, we are still in a society that considers emotions as an irrational intrusion in what concerns science. Here we have another excerpt. Depression during internship affects not only objective outcomes like medical errors, but also how interns value the profession and themselves, with potentially profound consequences for their future career decisions. Residency programs should implement both reactive interventions targeting depression and proactive interventions promoting resilience and well-being to address the issues that lead to depression. So here we can see what bioethics can do for emotional problems in the case of a depressed doctor. So we can encourage more training to promote resilience, more workshops to raise awareness toward emotions. We can create a legislation for fair conditions at work. On the other hand, emotions, or better, a deeper understanding of emotions in bioethics can help us to see these problems. These doctors, these students, these professionals have they have often to hide their emotional problems because they are with reason scared of losing their main source to survival, to lose their passion, the reason for which they do the job. And I think we can fix that. The second case, we were talking about the importance of becoming aware of our emotions, because being aware of our emotions creates a certain conscience about the intentions that are behind our actions, our words, our behaviors. Here I use the case of miscarriages. I try to use cases that are quite often, that happen quite often, that belong so much to our daily life that we don't even see them. So the case of depressed doctors, how often do we go to our physician and we see that our physician is so busy and at times it cannot even make a contact, a connection with us. And the case of miscarriages, I mean, 1 out of 3 women suffer from miscarriages. Nevertheless, we still live from an atmosphere. There's still an atmosphere around miscarriages that belong to a time that is not ours. I mean, we had the outing of the famous outing of Michelle Obama in her Becoming, in which she talked about her miscarriages, but it's still an event when a woman vents about all the emotions and feelings connected to miscarriages. Why? Because still today, a miscarriage is considered more or less like a flu. There are still textbooks or gynecologists formed on old-fashioned textbooks that support the idea that okay, you will not die of a miscarriage, you'll be able to conceive again, so you should just feel better soon. You should contain your emotions because they are out of place. We have a beautiful talk of and work of Elizabeth Fine, for example, in this field that consider the importance of being born. Being born is not just actually be there, but is the conception, is the projects, is the this life that evolves inside yourself, and sometimes it doesn't arrive to full completion, but that doesn't mean that life, or at least that a project, an emotion, an important emotion wasn't there. Now, I use this example because we have trainings to prepare doctors, nurses, physicians to cope with women and men, of course, who suffer from miscarriages. So couples who go through this to this experience. And even if all the actions are right, there's still a place for suffering, for a sense of remoteness, distance, uncaring way of approaching the problem. Here, I'm sorry, this slide is very intense. Here, I cited a story of a woman who was pregnant with twins. And she told the story of discovering during a routine check at the 20th week that one of the twins didn't survive. And she said, the professionals did all they were supposed to do. The gynecologist asked questions, asked if she was right, explained that this is normal, asked what she want to do next, and so on and so on. A number of routine questions. But the professional completely missed the point that for her that moment was somewhat infinite. The moment in which she received the news that her baby died, she was caught in a time that was completely mismatched with the time of the physician. In that case, on this point, the phenomenology of time from Kay Toombs is great to study the mismatch of emotional time when receiving a diagnosis. It's certainly something that one needs to consider, and unfortunately, one might have experienced in one's life. So, in that moment, she felt that the physician was somewhat there, but not there for her, not there with her. Fortunately, her husband, who was going through the same lived experience, was there to be with her, be for her, and they were together. And she asked herself, how much shock can a person take? How do we get past something like this? How can I give birth to the other child? So this is what was there. But emotional inexperience, emotional unawareness, emotional uneducation for professionals might lead to this huge gap for which, okay, we provide care, but this care does not result being so warm, so present, so as useful as it could be. This physician was not there for them, was doing its own job, which is absolutely good, but there was a huge gap that created care, the actual care, more difficult to arrive to the client. And this is just one episode. In my book, I indulged in more cases, and there's a beautiful online project on my body that puts together a collection of stories connected to miscarriages, but also other bodily problems, which are considered, not huge. We are not talking about a cancer diagnosis. We are talking about something that happens really very often. But exactly because it happens so often, we should learn at some point how to provide real care for each other. Saying, okay, you're going to have another child, it's not enough. It's not enough. All right. So, third case. Here I considered a few cases of how artificial intelligence is going to be used, for example, in hospitals. We know today that our hospitals are going to be more and more digitalized. The future is that we're not going to have one building where to go to receive care. We will receive medical care in our homes or in the place where we work or in small medical centers, because artificial intelligence is becoming more and more a part of the way in which we care for each other, which is absolutely great. One thing that is important to keep in mind is that we cannot reproduce our emotional ignorance in the artificial intelligence. Otherwise, our problems will remain the same, and even more, because there will not be a human being to which we can refer, to whom we can refer to, say, hey, wake up, you're doing something inhuman to me. Because there will be a machine, and the machine, it's designed to be not human and to resemble human, but not being exactly that. So, my proposal is a somewhat a phenomenological proposal, something that Heidegger, Heidi, Dreyfus already proposed, meaning we should consider the co-constitutive relationship that is established once we interact with artificial intelligence. What do I mean? I use a very straightforward example, Tinder. Tinder is a dating app that changed the way in which we actually form bonds and relationship. Before Tinder, the way in which we would connect with other fellow human beings was through approaching a talk, meeting, spending time together, and then maybe doing, making the first move. The introduction of this app created a new way of living relationships. So when we introduce an app, we have to be careful of how this app is going to change our values, is going to change our environment, is going to change the way in which we live. And this is true for a dating app as much as for online visits. With online visits, we are going to lose very likely, the connection with the face, with the full body, with the body language, for example, and that will be normal, that will be part of the routine. So I'm not saying that this is necessarily bad and we should shut down all the artificial intelligence. I'm saying that we need to be emotionally intelligent in designing artificial intelligence. Otherwise, we reproduce biases that will harm us. The meaning making responsibility is ours, it's from human beings. It's up to me to make important decisions. If I'm a doctor, I cannot let the AI to make the final diagnosis. I need to have an emotionally intelligent artificial intelligence to avoid any manipulation of emotions that might lead my user to feel more depressed. Here I'm thinking of social media, for example. So clearly we need to revise the way in which we originally thought the online world, the technology should have been. So at the beginning, the online, as we saw from the declaration of independence of cyberspace, was the place where to be free from the government. It was a space of negative freedom in which we were actually free from political interferences. Now we understand that certain introduction that we need our right to privacy, that we need our right to know uh, where our data are going, how they are going to be used. I mean, the scandal from Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, in which they interfered with elections, they used our data to manipulate our emotions, is clearly unacceptable. So again, here I'm presenting to you bits and pieces of different cases in which being aware of our emotions, paying attention to our emotions can help us to live a more respectful life and achieve a sustainable well-being. Here I cited also the case of early readmissions in hospital. We are going to use artificial intelligence to detect the cases in which hospitalizations failed because it required an early readmissions after the person was discharged. The curious thing about these early admissions in hospitals is that the data on which artificial intelligence is working do not entail at all emotional questions. So we are focusing on the kind of care the person received while it was at the hospital, but for example, we don't care about what kind of emotional network this person will have once is back at home. So clearly a person who lives alone for almost all its life will have more difficult to recover after being discharged from the hospital. So I don't know, these are just a few ideas I'm presenting you here, and I develop more in my writing, for which I think that we need to consider emotions in bioethics. Now here I use the visual, mostly the visual. There's so much to say about architecture and emotions, and I think that architecture is part uh, of the concerns that bioethics should have, at least according to the structure of bioethics that Potter gave, because a healthy environment is necessary for a sustainable well-being. And here we have offices, project by Eisenman, and I challenge you to work there. So clearly, this form of conceiving the space does not take into any consideration human well-being, human emotions, a human sense of claustrophobia, anxiety, and physical well-being. After all, here I cited an article in which they prove how the office design impacts on sick leave rates. And it was proved, it was studied that these offices planned by Eisenman have the highest rate of sick leave. And in looking at the picture, I don't think I need to explain why. Even if, again, on textbook, architects have been taught um, to not consider emotions in the planning of a certain environment. Nevertheless, if you want to create something for human beings again, since human beings are have emotions, and emotions are an important part of being human, we should start considering biased emotional biases in architecture as well. And this is just one example. There are so many examples that we can bring up to this point. And a last closing case we can consider as important consideration of emotions in bioethics, and in particular in the bioethical care for the environment, is using emotions to stimulate in class pro-environmental working class. So if you do a gardening class, if you show clearly the child what it means to care for your own carrots to come out, and what it means when, I don't know, something is trashed on that little piece of field, chances are that you develop a easier connection with the environment, that you know what it means because you emotionally experience that. Now, I know that there are countries in which this kind of education, a pro-environmental working class, has been reinforced and already put in practice. But there are, so I'm thinking of Northern Europe, certain places in the US, but the majority of education, environmental education in class, do not take into consideration the emotional presence. Here also, I cited this long excerpt from Basaglia to describe mental institutions as well. Here Basaglia asked his colleague, he suddenly realizes that he doesn't know what a mental institution is. And he's a psychiatrist, an important one with plenty of responsibilities in his hands. He's at a conference and he asks his colleague. And in a very pragmatic way, the colleague says, well, an institution is, so it seems that the colleague too was at loss for answers, this, what is around him. And Basaglia realizes, okay, we are in the room of an asylum. In that moment, I had the realization the institution at that time was the two of us there. So the environment, the structure is ourselves, with all our biases, with all our dreams, hopes, and emotions. Trying to separate emotions from us, it would create an environment that again is not fit for human beings, that do not care for human beings, that is not sustainable. And for many decades, asili and psychiatric institutions were not fit for human beings. So they were a huge problem weighing on the shoulders of the society and the government. It was more, as Foucault wrote, a place where to isolate and keep the stigma away, more than a place where to care. We are the environment, the human beings, with all the complexities that we carry around, all our emotions. If our discourses would, I keep reading, if our discourses would encourage an opening, that the institution was an open place as well, if our dialogues were closed, then the institution was a closed institution. It is about talking, but then there was also doing. That is, if the institution staff managed the institution in a mentally and practically closed way, then that institution is a closed-minded one. If it does the opposite, it is an open institution. So it's up to the people who manage the institution, the staff, the people who work in the institution, the people who receive care in the institution, that make that place a different place. And often we delegate to the place the role that we have to play. So I'm in a hospital, I will stick to the role that the hospital gave me, and I would not question my real self in this role, because being a professional would mean to separate my authentic self from the profession I'm doing, and this gives place to mm, to detachment, to distance, to remoteness, to unhappiness, because living a disconnected life is bad both for the professional and for the receiver, who keeps being treated by a mask and not by a real human being. So these are a few cases that I presented connected to the arguments I gave above, and these cases concerns the importance of knowing emotions for bioethical goals, the importance of knowing emotions in order to fulfill a bioethics that actually care for a sustainable well-being. In the next chapter, I'm going to propose cases for what bioethics can do for emotional well-being and emotional stability. I hope you enjoyed that, and I invite you to watch the next chapter.